just signing connections. We just
I'd like to welcome you on behalf of our Chief and Council. We're very pleased to see all of you here this evening. Carried on through the generations. When we start an important work, no
Capilano Longhouse, Squamish Nation. Hereditary chiefs, elders, spiritual leaders in the house, ladies and gentlemen, and the young people here tonight, welcome. I rise and stand before you to speak on behalf of a young man and a young woman who I have not yet met. To speak on behalf of a young man and a young woman I don't even know yet. I stand here before you to speak on behalf of my unborn grandson and my unborn granddaughter. Indeed, I stand before you to speak on behalf of the Squamish people and all the unborn generations yet to come. This is a teaching that we value. To always look to that place, to that unknown place that we call the future, where our children and our grandchildren and their great-grandchildren must live. And so what we do and say today must be done and said with their well-being in mind. Tonight I am charged with a monumental task. First, I must describe to you the terrible legal and political history that beset our people over the past 100 years or so, since the settlement of this place commonly known as British Columbia. This background, we believe, is necessary so that you may better understand the current situation of the Indian people, especially the Squamish people, in regards to the BC land question, Aboriginal rights, and Aboriginal title. And secondly, I'm charged with the task to publicly announce to you our objectives principles as it relates to a just and fair negotiations with the Squamish land question based on Aboriginal title. And during the course of the evening, these documents, this statement, this declaration of principles will be handed out to you. And so this evening I will try to be as clear and as concise as I can be on these two very serious and complex matters. First of all, I would like to address an important matter regarding our history in this country. As we try to forge a new approach towards Indian and non-Indian relations in this country, we cannot discount nor dismiss the events that have taken place in the past. History is always speaking to us, and we cannot ignore the historical record of failure, of frustration, and the actions of government down through the decades that have had such a terrible impact on the lives of our people in this country. A country that is founded on principles of democracy, fair play, and decency. Tonight I want to speak to you on what I call the conspiracy of legislation, this background, for you to understand. Because I believe in the view, as someone said, that the distortion of history cannot shield the truth from honest examination. We of all people in Canada know the power of governments to pass laws regarding the rights of people. We also know the power of governments to pass laws to deny the rights of people. And it is clear, based on the statute books, that the federal government and the provincial government and the colonial government of the early days passed laws that in effect stripped us of our rights to lands, our rights to resources, and our right to self-determination. Laws that denied us the right to practice our own religions, languages, and our culture. Even laws to deny our people the right to a decent education. It is our view that these array of laws, when read together over the decades, were designed to deny, to prohibit, to exclude Indian people from mainstream Canada. These were laws that made our people criminals and outlaws in our own homeland. They were designed to destroy their people. In 1870, the colonial government of British Columbia at that time passed what they called a BC Land Ordinance that provided for the right of preemption. This right of preemption, or a grant, was available to all British subjects who were male 18 years and over. It provided them the ability and the capacity to travel throughout this province where we lived, our traditional territories, to stake out 300 320 acres of land. This right of preemption was available to them, and all they had to do was stake it out, register with the proper offices of the colonial government, and it was theirs. We want to understand how this province was settled. We begin with this land ordinance of 1870, this right of preemption. And this right of preemption being available to all British subjects, except, it was very clear, to any Aboriginal person of this continent. Let me quote. The right of any male person being a British subject of the age of 18 years or over may acquire the right to preempt any land of occupied, unsurveyed, and unreserved Crown lands. 320 acres. In some other areas, 160 acres. It goes on to say, provided that such right of preemption shall not be held to extend to any of the Aborigines of this continent. So as early as 1870, we had colonial policy, eventually provincial policy, and federal policy that basically denied the First Nations of this country access to their traditional territories. And they combined that with the force of statute. The right of preemption denied us the right to stake out 320 acres of land so that we can call it ours. But I think it's interesting to note that Aborigines of this continent meant all of North America. So that the Squamish people who have relatives in Bellingham and the state of Washington, in the United States, even they, if they were an Indian person, was prevented in those days to come to this province to stake out 320 acres and hold it under your legal system, fee simple. I focus on that point to understand how settlement took place in this country through the passage of laws, through a piece of legislation that in effect denied a people of a right to do the same thing. In 1927, there was a joint parliamentary committee struck by which Indian people across this country had an opportunity to attend those hearings and give testimony. Our early leaders went there. One of our great leaders here, Hendy Paul, the late Hendy Paul, was one of our representatives. Reverend Peter Kelly, a Haida person from Queen Charlotte's, another key leader at that time, to address Parliament through that parliamentary committee on the BC land question. After the hearings, their decision was quite clear. They had said to us Indian people in British Columbia that we did not prove our case. They subsequently passed a piece of legislation called the BC Special. It had amounted to $100,000 per year, provided on a per capita basis to the Indian people in British Columbia. We rejected that because it certainly did not amount to a surrender of our title for payment of money. But more than that, it was recommended to the Canadian Parliament and the federal government put in force a law in the Indian Act 1927. Basically, that section in the Indian Act of 1927 said that Indian people in the province of British Columbia politically could not organize, that Indian people in the province of British Columbia could not raise money to pursue a land claims question. That same section also made provision that Indian people could not go out and seek legal counsel, to hire a lawyer and make payment, so that we could best understand the legal consequences of what was taking place. That section in the Indian Act of 1927 made it a criminal offense for Indian people to raise money. It also made it a criminal offense for Indian people to hire a lawyer to get legal advice. And if we raised money or we hired a lawyer, we were automatically judged and pronounced and deemed guilty of an offense, and we were subject to a fine of $200 or 2 months in jail. This piece of legislation, I say, strikes to the root of political rights in a democratic country called Canada. Strikes at the very root of seeking fair legal counsel to understand the issues at hand, and indeed made it a criminal act for our people to offend this provision. The Indian Act of 1880 passed a provision that made it a criminal offense to practice our culture, our traditions, to speak our languages in this house. They call those the potlatch laws. Many of our people who treasure the four corners of this house went underground because of this law. People from the Squamish Nation, the Squamish people practicing their potlatches, were put in the BC penitentiary for hosting a gathering such as this. Those potlatch laws were very, very damaging to our people in terms of our culture. It even went so far to say that if any person assists, helps organize a big time in the Longhouse, a potlatch, then that person who was assisting was also subject to the same penalty of imprisonment. So in this Longhouse, when we talk about name giving, passing on our traditional names to our young, it's our elders that help put that together because they hold the traditions. They know the way it should be done. So my great aunt and my great uncle were involved in giving me a name in those days. They were assisting. They were deemed criminals and put in jail if they were caught. The Indian Act also made provision for what they call enfranchisement. Enfranchisement, I suppose, really meant that if we deny our culture, if we deny our heritage, if we deny our Aboriginal rights and title to our traditional lands, and we become enfranchised through a governmental procedure and receive a piece of paper to say we were no longer Indian or Squamish, if we got that document of enfranchisement, then we were free to join Canada as a citizen. That was the procedure available to Indian people in this country for us to join Canada to be a citizen. We had to enfranchise and deny who we were. Education. Indian Act of 1880 and down through the decades made a provision. It was what they call an automatic enfranchisement, that if any Indian obtains a university degree of any sort in law, in medicine, or if any Indian becomes a priest or a minister, according to that section, we were automatically enfranchised and we were no longer Squamish. We were citizens. Our children were taken from our homes and put in institutions called the residential schools, most often run by religious orders. They made it a law that for us to attend an educational institute, that must be it, the residential school, that's it. Because on the other side of that same coin, the law was we were prohibited from attending the public school system here in British Columbia. And indeed, the Indian Act still speaks to a provision where if my child missed 3 days of school, no matter what the reason, he was automatically deemed a juvenile delinquent, and it's still provided for in the Indian Act. Some of you may know, most do not, that this very soil that we're standing on, this place that we call wemelch'stn, this house has been here for generations. Our ancestors are in this house now. But the soil that we're standing on is part of what they call the reserve system. The Capilano Indian Reserve number 5. The legal title of this land that we're standing on rests with the Crown Federal. Under the Canadian legal system, we do not even own this dirt that we're standing on, and that it rightfully belongs to the Canadian government, subject to the terms of the Indian Act. That is still the case today. How do you destroy a people? You attack their political rights. You attack their cultural rights. You attack their legal rights. You attack their languages and religions. You take away their ability to self-determine their own destinies. You replace it with what they call the Indian Act. You replace it with what they call a band council government. You ignore the traditions of our people and our hereditary chiefs. We had no champion. I could speak on our behalf in the provincial legislature in Victoria, nor did we have a champion to speak on our behalf in the Parliament of Canada. Because for decades, up to 1960, under that great humanist, John Diefenbaker, up until that time, Indian people in this country were prohibited by law to vote in federal elections, indeed to vote in provincial elections, and indeed, along with Chinese and the Japanese, prohibited by law to vote in municipal elections. We had no right to hire legal counsel, and we could not even raise money to protect our rights for fear of jail. So our land and our culture and our languages and our right to educate ourselves and to govern ourselves, all this body of law down through the decades had a tremendous impact on our lifestyle. Then we wonder about the system, the symptoms of poverty that may exist in many Indian communities throughout this province, because they had no economic base on which to thrive, and they had no political jurisdiction or power in which to create an economic or financial base. Because every corner that we looked to, we were denied our rights. And it's this background, I think you must understand, that has created the situation where Indian people stand today. It's time now to address the future. It's time now to move on. The Squamish Nation Council, on behalf of the Squamish people, have prepared what we call a Squamish Nation Declaration of Principle on Aboriginal Title. Some people will be handing out this document for your reading. We prepare this document in light of developments that are taking place in British Columbia and other developments across the country. But more particularly, we're talking about the Squamish people's Aboriginal title to our traditional territories. You all have heard through the media that the Premier of this province and the Premier's Council on Native Affairs has prepared a report on the BC land claims process. This is our response and our position as to the process of negotiation on Squamish Aboriginal title. Please understand that this is just a basic document that sets out objectives, that sets out principles to guide the negotiating process. They reflect our view as to how we envision the process should take place. We believed it was important and timely that we made this our position known and clear. So that if we had discussed and informed you of our historical past that brings us up to 1990, on how we should treat each other in this next decade as we approach the new century coming. Understand this reality that we face. We fully understand the mountain that we, the Squamish people, must climb when negotiations take place, if ever they take place with the Squamish people. Because we will be sitting opposite parties, the federal and the provincial government negotiators, who in our view hold great power, because both levels of government have the machinery and the resources of the state at their disposal. So as we announce tonight our objectives and principles to negotiate, and that we demand that negotiations take place. We are acutely aware of this mighty power across the table. Because the laws of this country are so structured that they command great power. So with that in mind, we have tabled and announced publicly what we believe to be extremely fair objectives and principles that may guide these negotiations. We believe that these objectives and principles will lead to a fair and a just settlement of the Squamish land claim. As you may already know, that here in British Columbia, the Indian people have never surrendered or relinquished our Aboriginal title to our traditional lands and resources. No one today can point to a document where a chief or an elder of the Squamish people surrendered or relinquished our traditional territories, nor the ownership of our lands and resources. It does not exist. There is a process that we call the historical treaty-making process that dates back to 1763, contained in a constitutional document called the Royal Proclamation of 1763. That document sets out the machinery for First Nations to negotiate and treat with government. The treaty maker is the federal government of Canada. The treaty maker is the Indian nation itself. That mechanism provided treaties all across this country, but it stopped here in British Columbia. Save for a few treaties in Vancouver Island, Treaty 8, northeast British Columbia. That was the basic mechanism to reach agreement between governments on traditional lands where Aboriginal title exists. That document is now protected by the Patriot in Canada Act, the Constitution of Canada. It's a living document, not repealed by anybody. We look to that mechanism to say that there still and is reason for the province of British Columbia, the government of Canada, the Squamish people and the First Nations of British Columbia to sit down in a negotiating process to make a treaty, to make a modern-day treaty or a land claims agreement. We look towards the Canadian Constitution, Section 35(1), Section 35(3), whereby treaties or modern-day agreements are automatically entrenched in the Canadian Constitution and are protected constitutionally. We see that as good reason to get on with the job of negotiations on the basis of Aboriginal title and Aboriginal rights. We approach these discussions with this in mind, that when British Columbia joined Confederation, there was a document spelling out its powers and how they form part of Confederation. When Newfoundland, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Quebec all joined Confederation through the Quebec Act, the Alberta Act, those documents spread out on the table form and frame the Constitution of this country, the British North America Act, the Canada Act. We approach these discussions on the stand that as the provincial governments relate to each other through the Constitution, through their various documents that legitimizes their existence, we see a modern-day treaty, a lands claims agreement, as a social contract. that allows us, the Squamish people or First Nations, to join Canada. Through the Royal Proclamation of 1763, that document being recognized as a treaty under Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution, now in place. So that we would join the circle of confederation. We would become citizens of this country and do not have to rely on the Indian Act and enfranchise. And in terms of the question of the Squamish Aboriginal title land claims, we'd like to make this clear that we are not about owning a piece of land. We are about being a part of the land. I would say that is the great difference between white society and our society. And how we relate to the land and how much we are intimately tied to the land and the nature living on the land, the animals and the fish. So we don't approach the negotiations as if this was a real estate transaction where rights are exchanged through a buyout, where we receive cash and we are required to extinguish our title and forever deny our heritage as Squamish people. We see the land claims process as more than that. We see that the land claims process and a modern-day treaty you've entered into, it's about our continuing relationship as Squamish with the federal government and the provincial government. We believe that we have a right to establish these relations with your governments based on the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And no one has said that that right has been extinguished. We believe that the land claims negotiations is not about extinguishment of our rights to land or resources. And it's not about legislation that legislates out of existence our culture. We believe that by entering into treaty negotiations with both levels of government is really not an act of surrender nor capitulation. We believe that if we ever reach that point where an agreement is made, that it would be a document of high order on a constitutional level. That it would be so comprehensive in its contents, where the rights of the Squamish people and Indian people and the rights of third parties in the North Shore of Vancouver and the rights and the jurisdiction of the province of British Columbia and the rights and jurisdiction of the federal government of Canada will all be contained within this document, within the four corners of a modern-day treaty. Our rights to resources and your rights to resources. Our rights to land and your rights to land. Our right to govern ourselves and your right to govern yourselves. Our right to educate our young and your right to educate your young. Our right to contribute to the society called Canada by having a firm footing, an economic and financial base. So that the Department of Indian Affairs and the federal government can get off our backs. So that we won't have people in this country standing up and saying, what are you asking for? You're on a free ride, you have a free lunch, government looks after you. We are sick and tired of the welfare economy in which we are put. We see a land claim settlement that allows us to participate in mainstream Canada, to make our own decisions, to have our economy thrive municipalities, so that our young could grow up and be doctors and lawyers and chartered accountants, and yes, even the Prime Minister of Canada, through proper education. We want access to higher institutions of learning so that our young that are coming in the future can make a great contribution to this country. So that we can have an incredible life. And so that you white people can have an incredible life. We want to address the issue of compensation. We think there are options in how that should be resolved. We don't want to use it as a scare tactic and throw billions of dollars out on the table without sitting down and trying to set out the parameters of that tough issue and scare everybody to the hills before we even get to the table. We want to deal with the issue of supersession of law and third-party alienation. It's now the government's policy. The federal government's policy is this. They have said to the Squamish people that our Aboriginal title has been extinguished already. And we said, how did you do that? To our traditional territories, to the Hausach. They said, well, we call it supersession of law. The federal government and the province has passed all these pieces of legislation, land acts, and by the weight of these laws, we have extinguished you as a people through your land and through your resources. You have nothing to stand on. They've said that Vancouver, being a heavily urbanized people place, third party has alienated your title. A big, tough question and an issue. They've said that third parties who now have private ownership of their lands and their homes have extinguished their title. Our research suggests to us that there is no legal foundation for that policy. They can't point to any legal jurisprudence that supports that policy. There is no case law supporting third-party alienation. And it's vague in its application. It's unfair in its application. Because it does not say, for Squamish, did that mean 10 people who settled your country that alienated your territory for all your lands? Or is it 20? Or is the figure 500,000 people? Or is it just one white person who was here in this country called Captain Vancouver many centuries ago? Is that what you're talking about? They have no reasoning behind it. So we say that the principles, the objectives of the process must deal with those issues so that we can reach an accommodation of some sort. I hold the view, along with the Squamish Council, Squamish people, that the process of negotiating and settling Aboriginal land claims, Aboriginal title and rights, should be a decent, civilized, honorable, equal, and fair process. I believe that all right-thinking people hold this view and aspire to the idea that it can be achieved. Seize the day. The opportunity here is to resolve a long outstanding issue instead of merely throwing out posturing political statements for political expediency. We can shape our future relations with each other, Indians and non-Indians. That is really based on the notion that we do possess a unique and a distinct place in this country founded on Aboriginal title and on Aboriginal rights to our traditional territories and resources. and the right to self-determination, self-government. We believe that all parties in the negotiation process, if it ever comes about, that all parties must not try to hang the shroud of failure on the negotiation process by hiding behind positions carved in stone. All parties to the process. We believe that this is basically a bunker mentality. Nor should we, as we are trying to establish good faith and good relations in putting this process into effect, should we try to employ scare tactics, scaring everybody in the world so that we become so distant we can never get to the table. We believe we should not employ old, tired ideas and mindsets about the issue of Aboriginal title and rights. We believe that there must be room to reach an accommodation by all the parties. We believe that a land claims agreement will be a document of coexistence and sharing, not one of an exchange of rights and extinguishment of money. We believe that the tone of this process must be one of fair-mindedness, aimed at reaching a just and equal and living treaty that will stand the test of time. But ultimately, on this question, the entire matter of Aboriginal title on the Squamish land question is a matter of rights and not merely a matter of process. Thank you for hearing my words. Hope Scott.
Good evening, chiefs, elders, and a special welcome to our guests. Tonight I have been asked to share some thoughts on the questions before us and discuss the present situation. The focus of my discussion will be the Indian Act, because this is the present situation. I think you should think of those words, Indian Act. I know of no other Canadian legislation that attempts to govern a race of people through a specific act. The very existence of the Indian Act suggests to me that long ago Aboriginal people were recognized as distinct and having a special place within Confederation. As my cousin said, 3 years ago, I had my Native heritage re-established through law. Bill C-31, which was an amendment to the Indian Act. And I'm not quite sure what the numbers were, but I think there was well over 150,000 people in this country who were affected like I was. For 35 of my 42 years of my life, I was a non-status Indian. I believe I grew up in the mainstream of Canadian society. I received an education and became an accountant. I speak to you tonight as someone who has been in both worlds, the native and the non-native. The Aboriginal people of Canada are entitled to a continued existence as a distinct society. And while the Indian Act protects this, it does in an inadequate way for both native and non-native people. I believe that the creation of modern-day treaties with the First Nations of this land is in the best interest of all Canadians. It's quite interesting to come back and to live under the Indian Act. It creates what I can only describe as a colonial or a parenting relationship between Native people and the Crown. Governments and their bureaucracies are placed in a position of trying to make decisions for a people that they don't understand. The Act clearly reflects a pre-existing fiduciary duty on the part of the Crown when dealing with Native interests. Interests which at this point in time for Squamish and others are not defined by any treaty. The Act imposes a unilateral set of rules from coast to coast for all Aboriginal people, and it ignores any traditional culture. It was not requested by Native people and was created without any meaningful input from Native people. If one takes a hard look at the Indian Act, one cannot come to a conclusion that it was created as a lasting document and that it is based on a sound set of principles. The Act can at best be considered a transitional document that is awaiting replacement, the modern-day treaties. At present, the Department of Indian and Northern Affairs, which administers the Indian Act, has an annual budget of somewhere between $3 and $4 billion, and is growing each year. The bureaucracy created by this department is expensive, and it prevents a good chunk of the budget from actually reaching the community where the needs are. Having been in both worlds, I have come to a conclusion that the Indian Act and the Department of Indian and Northern Affairs will never be able to achieve its mandate. It has become a tool, in my opinion, that places tax dollars into the Canadian economy under the guise of addressing Native needs. It has created a dependency for both Native and non-Native people that is not healthy. Only the first citizens of this country are capable of understanding their needs and taking responsibility for their own well-being. Modern-day treaties must have this as an objective, and it has to be better than the Indian Act. If we have learned anything from the events in Eastern Europe this past year, we must have learned that we can never eliminate the desire of a people to retain their own identity, their self-respect, and their culture. This does not mean that people cannot live in harmony and peaceful harmony. The non-Native population need not be fearful of the changes that are going to take place. It will enrich your lives and make Canada a better place for all Canadians. I thank you all for coming this evening and hope you leave with a better understanding of who the Squamish people are, where we come from, and where we're going. Thank you.
Hereditary chiefs, honored guests, and guests. My name is Hayukas. I'm the chief of the Nanaimo Indian Band, very closely related to most of these Squamish people. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Squamish Nation for what they're doing here tonight. It makes me feel so good and so happy to see you people here listening and trying to get educated on where we're coming from and exactly what we mean. By you people sitting here tonight listening to the Squamish Nation voice their concerns and state their position, these lies that are being spread in the media are going to be dispelled because you're going to hear the truth from these people. These sensationalisms that are taking place in the media, that we want the entire province.
Siem the CA, Siem is all about the quality and as Squamish. It's the squalid Nakunan, which is we will. The hardest question, so your leadership in bringing you people together. I want to thank them for using the traditional ways in which we do business, because what we are doing is business. This house that we're in for centuries provided our system of government, our system of title of land, title of songs, title of masks, and many of the titles that our families have this is the process that we use. I want to thank you people because you know you're very important to us. I don't know if you realize that. And as someone said that maybe you are the converted. I don't know if that's true or not. But if it is the case, you're very important in our life in this time in history. Because we're at a point in time in history where we have to begin to make a change. And to begin to make that change, we not only have to have the qualities to do that, but we have to have the ability to face the change. I want you to know that our people are very adaptable. You can see the results of how we have changed. Even though we hung on to our culture, we managed to go along with you, eating your foods. No matter what it was, we've eaten it. And we've shared our way. That wasn't supposed to be funny. Including Chinese food. But I want to thank all of you. It's so important that you open your way to our people. You know, sometimes when we're trying to explain ourselves, it gets very complicated. Our leader, Chief Matthias, who led us in our constitutional discussions, is very, very articulate man in describing what the system has done to us. But I want to share with you what our system does to us. You know, they say when our elders are teaching us, especially our grandmothers and our mothers, great-grandmothers, and this is why we are who we are. They say at birth, when our children are born, just like a little baby you hear crying, they say our mothers and our grandmothers used to take us to the ocean. And they used to introduce us to the land. And they'd say to us, our grandmothers would say to the ocean, "This is my son. This is my daughter. I want you to remember him or her, because she's going to come back to you, or he's going to come back to you sometime. And when he comes back, we want him to know what the rules and the laws are of the water." And then they take our children to the mountains and they do the same thing. They introduce our children to the mountains and we say, "This is our son and this is our daughter. We want you to remember our son and we want you to remember our daughter, because they're going to come back another day." And our people we explain ourselves to the land. The reason for that is because the land already has its own laws. It has already its own system. And the reason why human beings have to go through that process is because we human beings are the only ones capable of destroying that water, that mountain, those trees. We are the only ones capable of destroying. And that's why our parents and our grandparents, when they were doing these things, they explained to us, and we explain ourselves to the land, so that when we get there, we're not strangers. I see the happenings in Eastern Canada, and I see the happenings that are going on here in British Columbia, right here in Vancouver, right here on the North Shore. So I watched the TV and I heard some people tell us to go to hell. You know, we never treated you that way. We never thought that we would hear someone saying that to us, because we welcomed you. And again, like in the beginning, when you first came here, we educated you to the land. We educated you on how to survive here. Now again, almost 400, 500 years later, we're still trying to educate you to understand. And we think I say these things not to insult your intelligence, but to tell you that in this part of the land, there has always been a way. And it will always be like that. Because no matter how hard we try to change this land, it's not going to change. And you want to know why? Because you are going to become part of the land. That's where we will all become part of the land. eventually. So respect the land and respect everybody's way of life, just like we respect you. And again, I want to thank you for being so patient. I know it's hard sitting down for this long, but I want you to know that I appreciate it, and I'm sure that my relatives from this village, the Squamish people, appreciate your patience and appreciate your sincerity in staying here tonight. Thank you very much, my friends.
Chief Russell, Watstella, from Campbell River. He's a counselor with Quagio. You're welcome, Chief.
Gil Chrisley Della Wignagusta, Lila Khalas Nawa Kikaman, Squamish. Gil Chrisley University, Catholic Sila, Indian land question, Aboriginal rights. It's a great honor and a privilege to have been invited by your speaker over town today to this big house of yours, which goes farther, as I said when I attended Chief Tom Sampson's ceremony. These are our parliamentary institutions of our grandfathers. It is a great privilege and honor for you non-native people, and as people that don't come from the Squamish Nation, to be permitted to stand in this house. I have a little knowledge of the style and type of ceremonies that go on in this house when it's working in the winter ceremony. In 1955, my great-grandfather, grandfather and great-uncles baptized me into the Hamatsa Society. I was going to start at the residential period of my life, but seeing that the lady speaker covered that area, I'll go farther down in my own personal history. While you people were teaching, the educators of the Ministry of the Provincial Government seen fit to teach our children Dick and Jane and the Anglo-Saxon history of the world. The potlatch law was repealed about the time that I was old enough to come into the winter ceremony. At the same time I was being taught the hypocrisy history of the world. My own people and scientists were teaching me about the winter ceremony. I was cleansed and bathed in hemlock boughs with 3 of my cousins. I'm the only living one today from that particular group. We, the grandsons and the chiefs-to-be of the Ligwik Nation. We were taken to a sacred ground. It was called Athliket. It was a cleansing pool. We were taken there from October till January, until our grandfather took us into public for all the nations to witness in 1957. That place today is polluted. There's a grave, burial caves 2 miles from that place. That place is no longer existent. Your scientists took a skeleton 2 years ago of one of my elders without consulting our family who could this skeleton or remains belong to. In 1972, from the same location, your scientists, your anthropologists, your archaeologists took another skeleton without even informing the native community. Those are the great-grandparents of myself, my brothers, my uncles, the family that I come from. I come from a tribe that's called the Wahoo people. We're a mixture of Pominuk blood and Ligwik blood, and later in the marriage of my mother and father, Quagio. I'd like to see the day when that invisible iron curtain, the Indian Act, is no longer legislated against our people, where it no longer dictates the terms of the ownership of this land that we're standing on. The Creator knows, and you people know, and your governments know, who the inherent owners of these countries are. What the speaker said in his speech, many meetings I've attended in the last 5 or 6 years, especially in the last 2 months, our nations reiterate the position of the Squamish Nation. We too want to participate in something that the Creator left us. In 1904, a retribution to make in this country. I was housed here for 4 years by extended family. I've been substance-free for a number of years, drug and alcohol. And that's how I lost most of my cousins, by the way, was drug and alcohol. I owe my apologies and I owe my gratitude to the Squamish Nation and the hereditary chiefs for when I lived here in the past, any wrongdoings I may or may not have committed. I also owe my deepest apologies because it is you people I think about when I look at my own political career. And I'm grateful for the things and the way you people treated me. You treated me like I was your own. You.
And friends. Did you include our finned friends in that? I love the fish, as some of you may know. My name is Nuchi, given to me by the New Channel, and it means mountain. I'm very honored to come to you with that name. I've also been fortunate to receive the name Nanwakawi from the Baguio people, which means he who knows much. I feel honored to have those names and proud to bear them. I want to thank the Squamish Nation tonight for inviting me, for your hospitality, and for welcoming me and my family into the big house. It's a great honor, a privilege to be here. I've said many times, or told the story many times, of how I became aware of how much there was to learn from Native people about 10 years ago, when we were doing our first program on South Moresby, on Haida Gwaii. And I was interviewing a young Haida carver. He was called Gary Edenshaw at that time. Today we know him as Gujau. And Gujau was an early fighter for South Moresby, Waihanas. And I said, Gujau, or Gary, what difference does it make to your people if we cut the trees down? I mean, after all, you are a carver, you don't depend on those trees. Your people will still have jobs, they can fish, they have the land. Why is it so important to preserve that wilderness area? And he said a very simple thing. He said, yeah, of course we'll live it, but then I'll be like everybody else. And that simple statement was the first time I understood in a very, very profound way that for many Native people, not just in Canada, but around the world, there's a radically different perception of their relationship with the land and with the living organisms that occupy that land. And so the last 10 years for me and my family has been one of great learning, and we've been welcomed by the warmth and hospitality of Native people across Canada, and in South America, and in Australia and New Zealand. And we have learned much. I am here tonight as a non-Native person to listen, to learn, and I have done both of those things and been greatly moved. And I am here to offer my support, not just to the Squamish Nation, but to Aboriginal people across Canada. My support for your fight for Native land claims, and that comes unconditionally. I am with you, and if you ever need what little help I can give you, I am there to offer that help. You know, we Canadians pride ourselves at being a good people. We are against apartheid, and we support sanctions against South Africa. We are peacekeepers. One of our Nobel Prizes was to Lester Pearson for his role as a peacekeeper. We care about the environment. Boy, do we ever care about the environment. We talk a good line about the environment. And over the past few months, as Native issues have been kept on the front pages, in television, on radio, we've had to face the fact that I don't think that we can any longer honestly feel comfortable at saying we Canadians are good. The racism that has been brought out by the blockades, I have applauded. When I see the bigots at Shadow Gay burning effigies, I say, good, I want Canadians to see how close to the surface it is. You just scratch that veneer, and it's there, and we Canadians have to confront that. Only when we confront it will we have any chance of exorcising it from us. But we've got to face the fact that there is racism throughout this country, and that we are all a part of that. Our contribution through our uranium mines in Saskatchewan, in Ontario, that is poisoning Native peoples in those provinces, puts the lie to our great claims of being peacekeepers. That uranium is ending up in the whole process of the creation of nuclear weapons. The shameful way that we are destroying the lakes, the forests, the waters, the homes of Aboriginal people puts the lie to our great claims of caring about the environment. So I want to come here and I want to thank the Haida. I want to thank the Gitxsan Wet'suwet'en. I want to thank the Squamish people, the Lubicon, the Temahagama Anishinaabe, the Quebec Cree, the Innu, the Mohawks, for reminding us that unless we deal honestly, fairly, justly with their claims and settle them soon, then I, as a non-native, cannot hold my head up. It does me great shame. And so let us now begin through this kind of process, facing what Native people are asking us to face, and go forward and becoming that image that we so proudly hold up of good Canadians. You know, when the English and French first arrived in this country, the Aboriginal people that lived in North America lived far better, healthier lives than the average person did in France or England. That's a fact. And what the Aboriginal people did here was to welcome those Europeans, those poor Europeans, and showed them they fed them, and they clothed them and sheltered them, and showed them how to take part in the great riches of this land, and then they were shoved away, shoved aside. The scourges of racism, of oppression, cultural genocide, of disease, of alcohol, still didn't wipe them out. And to me, one of the great miracles of the 20th century is that Aboriginal people still live. They're still here. And now, in spite of all of that, in spite of those centuries of terrible oppression, as you've heard people describe tonight, they now stand ready by their pressure to claim their land. They stand ready again to save us, non-native people, against in another crisis. And I find that really ironic. They helped the new arrivals when Europeans came here, and they're going to help us again. You see, there is something fundamentally wrong today in the world. The planet is in great trouble. We have become consumed by our rush to make money, to possess material goods. We think that we no longer are part of the natural world. We live in cities. We're sophisticated. We drive cars and we have VCRs. And we think somehow that we're not like other creatures. And we forget that we are as deeply dependent on clean air, clean water, and clean food that has to come from living plants and animals as any other creature. And because we've forgotten that, we are now using those very things as sewers for the most toxic chemicals ever in history. And I thought the other day, what kind of people that we Canadians have become would erase the past, think no longer of the past, think only of the present, the bottom line, to make money, to possess things, and are willing to forego the legacy of our children. We don't give a damn about what we're going to live our children. Throughout human history, parents had children and hoped that they could leave their children something, and they would have at least the kinds of opportunities that they had, or better. And for the first time in the history of life on earth, you know that we know our children will not have a life anything like what we had when we were younger. We leave them with immense problems because in our rush to make money, we mortgage our children's future. And we let them pay the price for our obsession with this kind of consumption and the desire to create or make what we think is wealth. And I think that Aboriginal peoples around the world are there giving us a warning, telling us that there is a fundamental fight to save the planet that comes from saving our homes, the land, to leave something, to inherit that something from our ancestors, and to leave that for future generations. I see in governments all the time talking about compensating Native people for the land they flooded or the land they destroyed through mining and logging. There's a tendency to try to equate that with a simple dollars and cents equation or settlement. The government uses a word called mitigation. We mitigate the loss of land. And I think what mitigation means is you make it up by something else. Well, land can't just be mitigated by something over there. You can't mitigate the loss of land simply by paying money. When something is sacred, it is beyond value. And I want to tell you that someone alluded to the fact that the Japanese Canadians, who've only been in this country for 100 years, or plus or minus 10 years, and 40 years ago when we were turfed out of our homes, there was a great injustice done, and the government, amazingly, is now compensating Japanese $20,000 apiece for those that went through that. That was over a year ago. I have not been able to bring myself to apply for that money. Why? How can you put a dollar value on 3 years of people's lives gone? My mother died 4 years ago without ever knowing the apology from the government. She died with the humiliation of knowing that she was called an enemy alien in the land of her birth. Now, how can you replace that with $20,000? The government doesn't understand, and we've only been here for 110 years. Native people have occupied these lands forever. And how can we then say that we can ever compensate that with dollars and cents? And we've got to get over that idea that what the land claims are telling us is that there is something spiritual there that must be encountered. And in the process of facing up to that, we have much to learn. We have much to learn from that sense of place, of rootedness in land, that I believe could even help us get through the current environmental crisis we face on the planet. So thank the Squamish Nation for inviting you here. I thank you. And sharing their thoughts and their worldview, because they are giving us a gift that I think is priceless in the coming years. Thank you very much.
Next speaker would be Mayor Lanskill, West Vancouver.
Chiefs, hereditary chiefs, elders, members of the Squamish Nation, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate the opportunity of saying one or two words. I'm going to be very brief at this late hour of the evening. As the mayor of West Vancouver, I'm one of the guests here tonight, and I'm awfully glad that I came. I want to thank the Squamish Nation, their leadership and their membership, for putting on not only a hospitable evening and a very interesting evening, but I think most of all, a learning experience for all of us. And I'm sure that I speak for all of the non-native people when I make that statement. There is obviously a major problem. There is nothing that we can be very proud of. Our colleagues and our ancestors, the way that they have handled the native problem. There have been horrendous mistakes. I instinctively felt that we had not done it, and tonight, of course, the whole picture became much more clear. It emerged in stark relief, particularly the great speech that my friend Chief Joe Mathias made. So the sooner we can get down to discussion, I'm a negotiator. Most of my adult life has been spent negotiating with unions and with many other institutions. And the sooner we can sit down in a spirit of good faith and a constructive atmosphere and address the problem, the sooner we will come to a fair and justified solution. Nobody is going to get everything that they want. That's the real story of negotiations, as we all know. But we have to sit down in good faith and deal with all of the items on the agendas of all of the interested parties and work in good faith. It'll take a long time probably, but we have to start now and do a job of trying to resolve this problem so that the natives, the Aboriginal people, and the immigrants, which I am one, a fourth generation immigrant, can help to get together and build a better Canada, which is the objective of all of us. Thank you very much.
Next speaker will be Mayor Turner from Squamish.
Elders, hereditary chiefs, chairman of the board, councilors, members of the Squamish Nation, guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a sincere pleasure, actually it's an honor, for me to be here this evening to have heard the very eloquent, passionate speeches that have been given this evening. I don't believe that this is an opportunity for me or any politician to stand up in a soapbox and proclaim something that we can't fulfill in the future. I do believe that the method that the Squamish Nation has shown of opening dialogue, of allowing people the opportunity to express themselves in a free and open way, is what we, and as we've heard many people say earlier, our forefathers fought for. And it's freedom that we all aspire for. And it's freedom that we'll continue to aspire for. And I'm sure everyone here would be very strong in our feelings for the Squamish Nation and all natives and Aboriginals in the fight for their freedom so that they can enjoy everything that we have in this great country of ours to offer. It's a pleasure for me to be here on behalf of the citizens of Squamish, which is the district of Squamish, and we bored your name, thank you. And we're very proud and very honored to have that. Thank you.
The district, North Vancouver.
Elders, hereditary chiefs, Squamish Nation, friends all. I didn't expect to speak tonight, but it became obvious as we heard the very heartfelt sharing, the sharing from the heart, and we've listened from our hearts, that there should be a response. There should be a comment from those of us who live side by side and enjoy our beautiful North Shore. And maybe it's appropriate that as we turn midnight to the witching hour, the bad politicians got up to speak as well. I was interested in reading the material as at the break and as I was sitting listening that Chief Joe Mathias circulated to all of us tonight on treaty making. And I just made a couple of points about some of the items that really ring home and are just some of the issues about which we can have no disagreement. It is not our intention in negotiating a precise definition to our rights to disturb or displace any innocent third parties in the ownership of their land. That message was delivered clearly to us tonight by the Squamish Nation, and I thank you for that education. The land claim or treaty process should be open to the Squamish Nation regardless of our proximity to a large urban centre, of course. The negotiating process should be fair and expeditious. An independent authority should be established to monitor the land claim or treaty process for fairness and to ensure accountability. Both the federal and provincial governments should be committed to effective implementation of the land claim agreements or treaties. The land claim or treaty process should be broad enough to allow for negotiations on all issues that will facilitate the achievement of the previously stated objectives. I don't think we can disagree with any of those few items that have been included. I have had the privilege and the honor of serving as Mayor of North Vancouver District for the past 8 years, and I feel especially privileged to have had the opportunity to serve in a community where we live side by side with our native peoples. That's an opportunity that many other mayors wouldn't have the chance to take part in, and I want to applaud the incredible outreach that's taken part on behalf of the Squamish Nation tonight in inviting us into the Longhouse, in indicating what are the concerns, in sharing from your hearts, so that we know the next steps that we have to take. I also had the opportunity to serve as the president of the Union of BC Municipalities last year. I'm now sitting on the executive of past president. And as I was listening to the material and reading through, I thought, we just had the opportunity when the Premier announced the initiative that he has undertaken. He invited the municipalities also to come in and to make some comments. And I thought, now I wonder how closely the concerns of local government that we're expressing as the Union of BC Municipalities parallel what we've heard tonight in a process in dealing with the rights, Aboriginal rights. And so I went and had a look, and in fact I had it in my car to take home to read tonight, and I thought, well, I would share with you just a couple of the items that came forward from the Union of BC Municipalities' position on how to deal with the issue that we're here discussing tonight. This is a letter that's in fact gone to the Premier today. It's signed by our President, the Mayor of Port Coquitlam, Len Travelay, and it states, we'd like to take this opportunity to support the province's recent initiative to enter into negotiations. Clearly, the former approach was working to the detriment of all British Columbians. It goes on to state a process, and it talks about the awareness process, which has been so eloquently explained tonight. And it says, on behalf of municipalities throughout the province, there's a great gulf, and that was alluded to this evening, in the understanding of the band's positions on land claims, and this is further complicated by cultural differences between Indian and mainstream Canadian society. The province should foster and support a broadly based process of awareness building, and in fact, the Squamish Nation has done that tonight. This must occur in each and every community. An open communication process must be developed at the local level to ensure that people understand what is being discussed and how it will affect them. And that's again what you have done this evening, an open dialogue between the local community, between the local bands, and between the people of the province. We must build consensus on the objective of Indian land claim settlements, and we must clearly understand and support that process. The Union of BC Municipalities and the local governments offer our services to advance this critical issue, whether it be to expand on the ideas in our brief, which we have presented to the province, or to mobilize our members to implement in the communities throughout this province. And in fact, there's been some precedent with that over the past several years in discussions about the Indian taxation issue. Our feeling is that the people of British Columbia need to be involved and educated in the process. I applaud again the Squamish Nation for the wonderful leadership that you have shown. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and share with you this evening. Hachika.
First speaker I have up is Mr. David Barty.
Thank you. Education is the key in the Squamish Nation, and opening up this house to all of us this evening have begun that process. I think education will help bring about an understanding between peoples in this province and across Canada. I was very honored to be invited 2 weeks ago to be a witness here, and also honored to be able to speak. I spoke about some learning that I have been doing, understanding Aboriginal title. When I went to university and went to law school, I studied these issues. And I wrote about what the legal content of Aboriginal title was. Now this is a subject which is now becoming of crucial concern as negotiations begin. I also studied the leading case in Canada, Calder and the Attorney General. A case that inevitably, when it got to the Supreme Court, left the court split. But it did explore the legal concepts that are going to be grappled with in deciding what we do with the question of Aboriginal title. And from a lawyer's perspective, from a legal perspective, I studied and wrote about what the property concepts of the Indians of the west coast of British Columbia were prior to the arrival of the Europeans. There were very strong property concepts developed, an economic system that not many people understand when it's looked at, analyzed from a legal point of view, but it filled many of our current concepts of a complete system of property. And I mentioned 2 weeks ago that I was completing a book, and it is now finished and it's available. And I spent some of my savings to produce this, and there's a small charge for it, but if I am able to contribute to the educational process, I think that will contribute to understanding. And if these are sold, I will print more and more and keep the distribution going. So you can contribute to people understanding. If you'd like to understand these issues, the ones that will be discussed, I have a few copies this evening. And if there aren't enough copies, give me your name and I'll get back to you. Thank you.
Chiefs, hereditary chiefs, Squamish people, and special guests. My name is Don Bell, and I guess I'm here tonight as a representative of the North Vancouver School Board, and also as a citizen of North Vancouver, and interested in the affairs of the community, in particular, in the direction that the Squamish Nation has been taking in recent. I was invited to be a witness, and I'll be very brief. I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the opportunity that was made a few weeks ago and again tonight for the non-Indian community to be invited into this longhouse and to have the benefit of hearing members of the Squamish Nation and others express their opinions, their concerns, and try to inform us, those of us of the non-Indian community, a bit of the problems that have been facing the Indian people for a number of years, or for many years. And I think the problem is, and what I've learned in the last short time, is that the non-Indian population just does not know what has happened to the Indian people in Canada, in particular in British Columbia, over the years. I was talking to Chief Philip Joe, who sits on the school board with me as a school trustee, just recently, and he was telling me about, that you've heard the comments about how sort of basic human rights have been denied the Indian people, and how the experiences they had at Indian school and the lack of legal access. He told me that he was raised in the North Shore here, and that he attended Indian school not far from where our school board office is, and that he actually lived 2 blocks away from the school that he attended, and for 10 months of the year he was not allowed to go home. He had to stay in the Indian school. He was only 2 blocks away from his home. And further, that when he did attend the Indian school, he was given a number. Chief Philip Joe's number was number 3. And that on the school ground, they never called him, and he was christened with the name Philip. They never called him Philip on the playground, the teachers at the school. He was referred to as number 3, come here, number 3, go there. And he had the number 3 on his socks, on his shirt, he told me, on his jacket. And it reminded me sort of the kinds of stories that it conjured up of, I don't know whether I want to bring in the image of a concentration camp, but certainly a POW camp in war, where people are less than human, they simply become numbers. And I applaud the Indian people for the ability to maintain their dignity and the determination to rise above that over time. A number of years ago, from 1977 to 1982, I had the privilege of serving as mayor of the District of North Vancouver, and you've heard tonight from the current mayor, Mayor Baker. During that time, we began discussions with Chief Joe Mathias and other members of the Squamish Band to negotiate the building of a bridge through the Seymour Reserve Number 2, which is at the north end of the Second Narrows Bridge. And those discussions were finally fruitful, and those of you who drive into Seymour now drive over the results of those discussions. That's that modern new bridge. And I couldn't really understand at that time why the negotiations took so long. They took us 4 years. And why it seemed, in my way of thinking, that the discussions that the Squamish people the Squamish negotiators were so cautious and so slow, and that they just didn't seem to want to get on with this, and we were faced with a number of concerns as a municipality. I think I now have a better feeling of the distrust and the concern that those negotiators came from, the position that they had. In fact, I can recall at one time when we were discussing a road building Welsh Street, which is just down in the southern part of North Vancouver on the waterfront. The Squamish people wanted it to connect into Park Royal so there could be a lower road in Park Royal, and we wanted a road through to Marine Drive as a municipality before we would open our part of the road. And the Squamish people didn't know where they wanted the road to go, so we said, well, we just want you to agree that at some time you will put a road through. If you can't tell us exactly where now, then we'll go ahead on our municipal side. And I remember Chief Joe Mathias, I don't know if you remember this, Joe, but turning at me and saying, oh, what you want is a treaty. We know all about treaties. Where do I put my X? Do you remember that? I couldn't understand the anger that he seemed to bring to the negotiating table every time he came. I guess that was my problem, that was my ignorance. I didn't know at that time how far back in time the Squamish people had tried to rectify the wrongs that had been done to them. I didn't know what those wrongs were. I didn't know how the Squamish people had been denied the right to seek justice in our legal system. And Joe, I guess tonight, not as a school trustee, but just as Don Bell, I apologize to you for that lack of ignorance, or for that ignorance, and for not being more curious and concerned about your frustrations and your anger. And this to you and your people, please continue with your reasoned patience. Let's not get into the kind of situation that's happening back east. Let's continue with the kind of dialogue that is evidenced here tonight. I'm very honored to have been invited to your Longhouse. It'll be a very important memory for me in the future. Thank you, Pachka.
Risa. That's okay that you got my name just a little bit wrong. As I was sitting here, I started to feel like I wanted to speak. And I started to wonder what it is that a short white woman could possibly have to say in a Squamish Longhouse gathering. And then I decided that what I wanted to share with you was, first of all, my real name, the Slavic name that was given to me by my parents, and that is Raisa Marika Sturhun. And I haven't used that name for years. And I started wondering how that relates to the land claims issue. I'm a first-generation Canadian. My father came over here. He was in a German camp, and it destroyed much of his spirit and contributed to my coming from a dysfunctional family. My grandparents on my mother's side came over to Canada to escape oppression as well. And I am starting to see how none of us are different. In the 1930s, the Russian government systematically starved about 6 million Ukrainian people. That had to do with land claims. That had to do with power over and a government that wanted total control over society that loved its land. I'm also quarter Jewish, and I don't need to tell you what the Holocaust was about. In medieval Europe, 9 million of my sisters were tortured and burned as witches, and a great deal of that was about land claims. Last year, when the wall went down in Germany, I experienced a flood of emotion, and weird things started to happen to my body. I was experiencing just an overwhelming need to be and to know my people. I walked around work for a week wearing a Ukrainian shawl. And yet I've never even been to the country where my father and my grandparents were born. I love Canada. And I am appalled and ashamed that I was told by my government and by my school system that I am, by all rights, a Canadian. I was not told that I am living here and that I have the right to call myself a Canadian without the consent of Canada's Indigenous people. What was done to my ancestors and to my immediate family is being done to people here, and I have inadvertently been pulled into it without my consent. And every non-Native person here is involved in this issue, whether you want to be or not. I want you to think for a minute about the reasons that your parents came here, that your grandparents came here. If you're here for 4 generations or 6 generations, it doesn't matter. The people that you come from moved to Canada for the same reason that the Native people are fighting land claims today. Tonight, I've experienced something new. We all have. I didn't really know what self-government meant. I'd been through the same school system as all of you, where we're colonized, herded into classrooms and told what to think. When voting time comes, we walk into the polling booth and mark our little X on the paper. And tonight, I've experienced something very powerful, where anyone who calls themselves a citizen, or anyone who is just simply a human being, can get up and speak. And that is self-government. And that's all the Natives are asking for. So there's 2 things that I'd like people to think about as they leave here. That we have the right to empower ourselves, to govern ourselves. The Natives have the right to govern themselves. And I want everyone to remember their ancestors and the reason that they're able to sit here tonight in what we call Canada. Thank you.
Next speaker, Alderman Brian Giles.
My introduction to the community and to the Squamish band was through an old and dear friend, Chuck Billy, who has since passed away. When we came to Squamish, the thing that we noticed that was so beautiful about the valley was the vibrant river systems and the deltas, the very rich deltas, and the numbers of migratory flocks of birds which came and went, particularly in the winter, when we'd have huge flocks of mallards wheel down into the meadows, when we'd have 1,000, 2,000 bald eagles come in for 2 months, eating the spawning salmon that had landed on the banks of the river. And the vibrant delta is just teeming with life. It still is. That got me involved with the Squamish Estuary
and a number of people that cared about it as much as I did. And after a while I started to realize that we're fairly Johnny-come-latelys when it came to this whole concern about the environment and conservation, because the people that really carried the weight when it came to conservation were the people that had been environmentalists all their life, and the people that had been very civilized in the manner in which they had lived in that valley, and the manner in which they had enjoyed the riches of that valley, and that was the Squamish Bend. Chuck told me how he had come from the shores of Capilano. In fact, I think Jack Capilano was actually a relative, I think a grandfather, if I'm not mistaken. And it inspired me to think that here were these people living in not very good conditions either. Chuck's wife left here earlier tonight, Barbara. She's still suffering an emphysema brought on as much as anything else by a very toxic chemical plant. It sits just a little bit downwind from her area of the establishment reserve. And the people on that reserve still carry the stigma of the mistakes that were made in terms of putting chemical plants in the middle of river estuaries. There's things that have gone wrong in the past, and I'm an alderman there, and we enjoy a tax base based on that chemical plant, and I don't think it's necessarily a good thing for the future. I'll be glad to see it go, quite honestly. We've also lived a good life based on the tax base from wood fiber. Everybody knows about wood fiber, right? You know, it's about the only chemical soup line that you can come across and up and down Howe Sound. Literally, it's an old mill, an outdated mill. It only recently started to do some rebuilds to try to recreate something like a pristine environment, and they put $250 million into it, and there's still problems. We're still getting dilemmas with the amounts of chemicals getting into the environment. I think I have to say to the band tonight, and much like Dr. Suzuki put it, is that I feel in many ways that the native civilization is superior to our own. That's the way it's always impressed me. The attitude towards sharing, towards compassion, towards one's fellow human beings. The attitude towards the environment of taking what you need and no more. The integration of your lifestyle with your surroundings. The recognizing that you are not here to conquer or dominate nature, but that you are part of nature, and that you are here to act as a squire or a nurturer, to take care of the surroundings and your environment, to pass them on to future generations. Nobody can own land. I'm a realtor, can you believe that? And I sell land all the time. Chuck used to say to me, you can't sell that land, that's Indian land. And what he was getting at is that basically nobody owns the land. You merely act as its protector at the time that you take care of it. And basically that's what you're dealing with here. And I think the band should be rather careful, because and I'll also throw in this factor that I'm an NDP candidate for West Vancouver Garibaldi. And I'm very worried about the manner in which the present government is very cynically pushing the land claims issue into something that is stampeding the landowners, the white landowners of this province, into some sort of a feeling that the Indians are on the rise and they're going to come and take my house away from me. It's patently ridiculous. I think we all understand that here tonight. I think that the government should grow up. I think that they should get their act together. I think the Premier should talk to the Minister and vice versa and decide what the hell it is that they're doing. I don't think they're doing much. I think they're doing their best to pretend to be sitting down with the feds. And you know there's going to be buck passing when it gets right down to it. Whose fault is it? Who pays what? There's no understanding of the metaphysics of the situation. There's no understanding, Joe, of the idea of that the native need is not so much to have billions of dollars worth of settlement. It's a need to be treated as an equal and dignified and competent nation in its own right and in its own land and with its own powers to direct its own destiny in tandem with white Canadians coming from Europe and other parts of the world who will equivalently have their rights, their powers, and direct their own destiny. There's no understanding of that sense of dignity, parallel development. It's lacking. I'm really disappointed. And then, as an NDPer, I can tell you that I've seen Mike Harcourt, who has traveled to 27, I believe, out of the 29 tribal councils throughout British Columbia. And he has spoken feelingly in provincial council meetings and in several situations where there was no media present. He's spoken feelingly about his consideration that he sees it as the prime #1 problem in this province, because it is based on the land concept. If we can't make peace with the original people that lived in this land, how can we understand how to create a land base for stability and security, for forest industry, for fishing, for mining, for almost anything we do in that land? You know, it's not just a matter of who owns the land, it's a case of how we get along with the people that have the rights to that land. And I've been inspired here tonight. I feel that there's a good future ahead. I think we're all growing up. I think we're taking a step in evolution. I was really surprised to learn some of the legal ramifications about the manner in which Indians have been totally discriminated against. I knew about the potlatch law, but I didn't know that the voting was so long coming. I'm just so surprised. Just appalled. But it gives me a sense of resolve to point this out and point out, as David said, that if you scratch this little veneer of civilization that the whites carry about the way they handle themselves here in Canada, you discover the bigotry and the racism and the ugliness underneath. And I think we all need to get a lot busier with creating a better world, and I think we must look forward to the Native Nations and their dignity and their past and their power to live in peace and live in harmony with their surroundings. I'm inspired by it, and I learned a lot here tonight. I thank you very much.
And let's first few of you others are still here. I don't know where this is going to go, so I'll try not to be long. I had an interesting experience last Friday. I shared a 6-hour car ride with a bigot from here to 100 Mile House. And that was my girlfriend's father. And it was interesting. He's a man of British extraction and a great fan of Doug Collins, so you know where he's coming from. And we're both members of the same political party, both members of the Reform Party, so I figured he thought that I was right in line with him, which I obviously aren't. And during the course of the ride, we're talking politics, and the Oka situation came up. And his idea to resolve the whole situation was to send the army in there and just start shooting them up, and that would clear everything up right away. So I mentioned to him that my sister-in-law was Native, and that her and my brother had a 3-year-old son. And his response was, "Well, you'll be paying rent to him in the future." So I said, "Well, with Native blood in the family, we'll have a place to stay. Where are you going to live?" It was a quiet ride for the rest of the journey. But started to think about what was going on in Oka, and very dangerous precedent being set there. And I don't fault either side for what's occurred. But when you look at land disputes that are going on around the world, in the present and in the past, the Israeli-occupied territories, Northern Ireland, the Azerbaijanis, Sri Lanka, Oka. one common line is running through there is that there's always been death involved, and people are willing to die when it comes to fighting for their land. I'm a little nervous right now, excuse me. And I see here on the West Coast we have an opportunity right now where we can come to resolves without having to spill blood, and we can set a precedent to the world and to the future when these problems arise again in the future, that through talking and understanding and education, that we won't have to worry about what's going on and what we see going on in the news every night. One thing that I don't want to have is my nephew come to me 20 years from now and, ask me why we didn't address things then if they're still facing the same problems, why we couldn't see the writing on the wall, and why we're just sort of shoving everything under the carpet. I think we have the opportunity now to talk to our politicians who don't listen to what the people have to say. They get elected and they follow party line or have all of their meetings behind closed doors and sort of shut us out. And unfortunately, I'm afraid that Mr. Vandersdam is going to use this to his advantage in the next provincial election, because I think what you'll probably see is a referendum on the ballot asking the people of the province to voice their opinion on the entire land claim settlements dispute, and then he'll be able to take that to the members of the First Nations. And this is the time when we have to start organizing, and with things like we're experiencing and witnessing and being here tonight, education, we have to go up from here and let everybody else know. And I guess that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
People say, well, why can't you Indians get together? 100 years ago, we were warring against each other. It's a short time to bury the hatchet. We are as different as Dr. David Suzuki and myself. I do not speak the Chief's language, nor he mine, nor do I speak Chief Russell, I'm sorry, I can't remember your last name. We speak different languages. We share something similar in the culture, but by and large we are different people. So when our leaders try to get together, there's lots of old blood between us. Try as we might, pretty damn tough. The bridge that we're building is a good bridge. It's a bridge of understanding, of educating one another, of supporting each other. To me, that's what this is all about. I'd like to thank those who requested me to help with this work. It's been an honor. But I'm sure glad holidays tomorrow because I'm tired. I'd like to thank the chiefs who come here to share tonight with us. It's an honor to have you in our house. My hands go up to you. My closing remarks. If you can take anything away with you from tonight, please feel free to share it with whomever you want. Because for us, it's easy to go up, and I'd like to say thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. We've all learned something. We can be friends. We can be under the same roof. Walk away, you with a good feeling and I with a good feeling. our late father being here, witness all of this work that's being done. I know that him and all our ancestors that have gone before us would be proud of what we're attempting to do. I know probably a lot of them are sitting around in here tonight, holding up their hands to the leadership that is being provided. Chief Joe Mathias, hold up my hands to you. You're a great orator for our people, a great warrior for our people. I'd also like to thank those who worked behind the scenes, all the ones who worked in the kitchen, our security people, being out there guarding your cars.
Great Spirit to protect them. We ask the Great Spirit to guide them on these chosen paths. On behalf of the chiefs and counselors and members of the Squamish Nation, I'd like to present this Eagle Feather to Dave Sikuski.